So now let's move on to our second marine reptile, which is the marine iguana. There's only one species and it lives in the Galapagos Islands, and it's the only marine lizard. It's got some pretty cool adaptations though. So first of all, it's a strict herbivore and only eats algae. So it lives near the coastline and stays on the rocks until it has to go into the ocean to eat algae. It doesn't drink any fresh water, so it receives all its water from its diet. And it has these special salt glands on its nose that allow it to remove excess salt from the body and then basically sneeze that concentrated salt like slurry out. So it's constant. So if you look at videos of them, they look like they're constantly blowing snot all over the place. And that's just concentrated salt slurry, essentially. They are ectothermic poikilotherms, just like our sea turtles. So they bask in the sun to warm up, and then when their muscles are all warm, they plunge into the ocean to feed. But they can only stay there a certain amount of time, like 20 minutes, because their temperature, their body core temperature, will drop to the ocean temperature. And this will slow them down. And so if they stay in the water too long, they can actually drown because they can't move anymore because they're too cold. Another adaptation is that their tail has been laterally compressed, so flattened, side to side essentially. And that's their main mechanism of swimming in the ocean. So they have a very cool kind of slithery slide to side swim, much like a snake, a sea snake. And their tail is also very muscular. And so here's a picture of a marine iguana eating some algae under the ocean. And you can see, the divers over here. There's actually a great video that I'll put in the extra videos section so you can see these guys in action under the water. They're really, really good swimmers, really beautiful. They do get preyed upon by Galapagos sea lions, so they do have predators that they have to watch out for. These guys can also live quite long. They're known to live about 60 years, and they hatch about 2 to 3 eggs per season, and the eggs take about 2 to 4 months to hatch, and the population is quite healthy. Around 200 to 300,000 of them are found around the Galapagos Islands. Their main threat is to El Nino. So here's kind of where the Galapagos Islands, which are part of Ecuador, are in relation to our island. So there's Big Island there, there's the main 8, and here's the Northwesterns. And so they're pretty far away from us. And they're also a little bit closer down, actually underneath the equator. And during El Nino years, what happens is the trade winds that normally blow right east to west die down, and all this warm surface water starts floating over to this area. And what that means is it essentially halts upwelling. And so when there's no upwelling occurring in this region, then there's no nutrients that are brought up from the deep, and algae doesn't grow. This actually affects not just the algae, but it can be felt all through the food chain, because with no algae, then herbivores like our iguana can't survive, fishes can't eat, and then bigger fishes can't eat, etc. And so El Nino years can really result in a lot of loss to our marine iguanas. So hopefully we don't see a lot of El Nino years. But because of climate change, El Nino years are becoming a little bit more frequent. Our next subject is the seabirds. So there are a lot of seabirds. Birds in general are pretty fascinating. And again, they're ancestors of reptiles, and you can see that really clearly, especially on their legs, because they still have scales on their legs. And so all birds in general are endothermic, so they generate their own heat internally and maintain a constant body temperature, just like mammals do. So they're homeotherms. And they are also have other adaptations that are similar to mammals. So in general, birds are adapted for flight. And some of their adaptations are the fact that they have hollow bones so that they're not as heavy, so that they can fly more efficiently without using a lot of energy. Feathers are their main means of flight and lift, so feathers are really important and also helps with insulation. And they have a very fast metabolism, as do mammals, because they're generating their own internal heat source. And because of that, they have a four-chambered heart just like ours. So they've got two separate circulation systems, the pulmonary and the systemic, essentially. And seabirds in particular have some cool adaptations for marine living. So they secrete oils on their feathers on the surface so that they're waterproof, so that they don't drown or get cold. And just like in marine iguanas, they also have salt glands near their beaks. And so most of their water comes from their diet. And so they excrete excess salt from these salt glands in a very similar way to the iguanas do. They don't necessarily sneeze it out, but that leaks out from their salt glands. And lots of seabirds that spend time actually bobbing around on the surface of the ocean will have webbed feet for swimming. And then, of course, our penguins are completely modified for swimming. Penguins are really cool because they have all these really neat adaptations. So they don't fly at all, which means that they can be a little bit bigger and heavier and carry fat underneath their skin, similar to mammals, for insulation. And so here are just a few of the many different types of seabirds that can be found in Hawaii, along with their Hawaiian names. So we have a couple different species of albatross or mole, the famous frigate bird or Eva. So the North Shore town of Haleiwa literally translates into house of the Eva bird. We have a couple different types of boobies here. This is a picture of the masked booby, and they're called We have also quite a few different types of terns, and so these are some of the more common terms that you can see. The sooty tern is very common on Kauai, and it's called ewa ewa. And then the white tern or fairy tern, the mano-o-ku, is the Honolulu city bird. This fairy tern, this population, you might see along, around town, even in Kapiolani Park, trees that have blue or yellow ribbon around the base. And if you look closely, you'll see that that's because there's a mano-o-ku nesting in the tree there. An interesting fact about these guys is that they don't actually build a nest for their young. They lay an egg on the branch, and the parents take turns nesting with the egg until it hatches. So there's no kind of protective nest for the egg. It just sits on the branch, and then the bird sits on the branch once it hatches, and they feed it for a couple months until it's ready to fledge. You can even look around our KCC campus and see that tape around the base of trees and find a mano-o-ku baby up there somewhere in the branches. And finally, we have a couple different species of shearwaters. And shearwaters are really interesting because they are ground nesters. So they'll return to the same nest season after season and lay eggs in a little kind of tunnel that they build. And this makes them especially vulnerable here in Hawaii because of our rats and mongoose and cats that can come and take their babies. And I just wanted to highlight who Wisdom is. She's a Laysan albatross that was first tagged in 1956. So she has been monitored since the 1950s. And she's the oldest Laysan albatross that we have documents of. She's 70 years old this year, and she nests in Midway Atoll. And this is her newest hatchling. So these guys nest every 2 or 3 years. They have a baby, usually just one egg. She's been with her partner. So a lot of these birds have monogamous relationships with their partner. And she's been with her most recent partner since 2012, as far as we can tell. And so she's a pretty cool Laysan albatross since we have such a complete record of data on her. Some other common birds that you won't see in Hawaii, but probably seen in other places, include cormorants, which are excellent divers. These guys can dive down to 60 feet to catch their prey. There's about 40 different species of cormorants all around the world. Pelicans, also very good divers. These are the guys with the big kind of throat pouch that can scoop up lots of fish in one gulp. There's about 8 species of pelicans around the world. And then seagulls, which are pretty darn smart and have adapted to living in the presence of humans quite efficiently. And there's about 50 different species of gulls all around the world. And finally, our penguins. Penguins are very unique because they have completely adapted to a marine lifestyle. They have abandoned flight altogether, so their wings have turned into flippers, and their feathers are very streamlined and small and mostly used for insulation. So thick feathers for thermal protection. There's about 18 or so species of penguins in the world. All of them live in the southern hemisphere, so at the tip of Patagonia or South Africa, and most notably in and around Antarctica. The largest are the emperors, and they have amazing diving capabilities. They can dive down to over 500 meters, which is over 1,500 feet, and stay down there hunting around for food for up to 22 minutes. Okay, so let's move on to our mammals. So mammals in general, all the mammal species on this planet, there's about 5,600 of them. So just think for a minute and compare that with all the different species of fishes that we have on this planet, about 30,000 of them. So 5,600 species of mammals, and only about 130 of them are what we consider marine mammals. Characteristics of all mammals include hair or fur at some part of their life cycle. So yes, even dolphins and whales have hair or fur. Fat under the skin, so subcutaneous fat, and that's mostly for insulation. They are endothermic homeotherms, like our birds, so we generate our own internal heat and we keep our body temperature very consistent. And the most important characteristic of all the mammals is that we have mammary glands to feed milk to our young. This is what separates us from other groups of organisms, and it also is what gives us our name, mammals, mammary glands. So definitely remember that. So the major groups of marine mammals that we're going to cover today are the Pinnipedia, or the seals, sea lions, and walruses, or walrus. There's just one species. And then a few organisms in the carnivora. So carnivora also includes a lot of other organisms, but marine organisms in this group include the sea otter and polar bear. And then the sirenians, which are dugongs and manatees. And then finally our cetaceans, the whales, dolphins, and porpoises. So let's start first with our pinnipeds. These are our seals and sea lions. And this is just to show you the main difference, or how you can tell the difference between a sea lion and a seal. So sea lions, as you can see, have much longer, stronger anterior flippers, and they can rotate those flippers so that they can kind of walk on land. They're much better land walkers than seals are. Seals kind of worm around basically on land, so much shorter flippers. Sea lions also have little external ear flaps that seals do not. And they tend to have a much longer neck that they can turn and kind of gracefully and very efficiently swim in the water, whereas seals don't have that long neck that they can prop their head up with, especially when they're on land.